Mike Johnson can afford to lose one Republican and still be able to become Speaker. It's the rest you need to worry about.
Would that be enough to get your vote for Mike Johnson?
Oh, no. You can pull all my fingernails out. You can shove bamboo up in them. You can start cutting off my fingers. I am not voting for Mike Johnson tomorrow.
If they thought I had no Fs to give before, I definitely have no Fs to give now.
At noon today, the Republican-led House of Representatives is scheduled to elect a Speaker of the House, which is constitutionally required before any other legislative act can be taken, including certifying Donald Trump's victory in the 2024 election. It's that important. And the most important question at the moment is whether the current Republican Speaker, Mike Johnson, will retain his position, which is going to be close because if 2 Republican Congresspeople defect, he loses his job. And despite the fact that, as of this morning, Trump has once again publicly reaffirmed his support for Mike Johnson, at least one Republican congressman is publicly defying both Johnson and Trump, potentially setting both of them up for a major public humiliation. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we got a couple of clips to look at, but this is a pretty big deal. In about an hour at the time of recording, the House of Representatives is scheduled to have its first vote for Speaker of the House, and the question is whether or not Mike Johnson will succeed, either on the first election or the 12th or at all. As friend of the show and Democratic Congressman Maxwell Frost has pointed out, good morning. Today I'm supposed to be sworn in for my second term in Congress, but before that happens, the House has to elect a Speaker. It's looking very likely that House Republicans won't be able to do that on the first ballot. Sound familiar? See you at noon. We'll get to the sound familiar part, but more important than that is the fact that the cult leader, the president-elect, or at least on paper the president-elect, Donald Trump, is once again, as of this morning, publicly reaffirming his support for Mike Johnson and endorsing him. Donald Trump said on Truth Social, quote, "Good luck today for Speaker Mike Johnson, a fine man of great ability who is very close to having 100% support. A win for Mike today will be a big win for the Republican Party and yet another acknowledgement of our 129-year most consequential presidential election. A big affirmation indeed, MAGA." Now, again, he is overstating the landslide, the avalanche that he claims to have as a consequence of the 2024 election. The fact that Johnson's speakership is in serious jeopardy is proof of that. I digress. Mike Johnson responded, "Thank you, President Trump. Today is a new day in America. Congressional Republicans must stay united to quickly deliver Trump's America First agenda. Let's get it done." But in response to this is what Thomas Massie had to say. Nearly everyone knows from his 18th-month history of betraying Republicans and teaming with Democrats that Johnson isn't the right guy. If he fails on the first round today, a better speaker can be elected in a few hours or over the weekend. So once again, Thomas Massie, Republican congressman from Kentucky, is basically giving Johnson and Trump the finger. Johnson in particular, he's got to be a bit more cautious around Trump, but even Trump. And Thomas Massie, who's apparently growing a beard and he's ditched the glasses, he's going through his his rugged renegade, arc. He's having a conversation with former MAGA Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz about whether or not he will support Mike Johnson. I want you to hear how vociferously he condemns Johnson and how emphatically he says he will not support Johnson.
If Chip Roy were asked to serve as chairman of the Rules Committee, would that be enough to get your vote for Mike Johnson?
Oh, no. You can pull all my fingernails out. You can shove bamboo up in them. You can start cutting off my fingers. I am not voting for Mike Johnson tomorrow. And you can take that to the bank.
Who are you voting for, Thomas? Who are you voting for?
For all our viewers.
So, it seems pretty clear. Now, of course, Thomas Massie is a Republican congressman. Republican politicians, as you know, have a propensity to lie, the likes of which we have never seen in elected officials. They certainly lie more collectively than Democratic politicians. But that's Thomas Massie almost gleefully taunting Donald Trump and Mike Johnson like, hey, it doesn't matter what you concede. It doesn't matter what you publicly support. It doesn't matter what endorsement you offer. I'm Thomas Massie, and I have the power here, and I say screw you. Which is weird because we look at MAGA usually as a cult, but there are some exceptions, right? When Donald Trump, for example, during the campaign trail, tried to brag about one of 2 things that he was successful in during his first administration, which was good for the American people, which was, Operation Warp Speed, which hastened the manufacturing of the COVID vaccines. It was one of the few times we saw the MAGA cult break. They booed Trump publicly. They hate vaccines seemingly more than they even love Donald Trump, which is saying something. So Trump had to back off from touting the success of the vaccines, and then he had to vilify them. Again, one of like only two things that he accomplished during his administration, which was good for the collective American people. This might be another one in the sense that we have a prominent MAGA Republican, or rather a prominent Republican elected official, who is potentially in a position to totally screw Mike Johnson and indirectly Donald Trump. Remember, the razor-thin margins in the Republican-led House of Representatives are so thin that at the moment, Johnson can only afford to lose 2 Republicans. And if Thomas Massie sticks to his word, which is, hell no, I will under no circumstances vote for Mike Johnson, that means Mike Johnson can afford to lose only one other person. If he loses one other person, if it becomes 2 people, it's game over. That's not good. Or rather, I should say, he can only afford to lose Thomas Massie if he loses a second person, an ally like Victoria Spars of another Republican congressperson who has said in the past that she won't vote for Mike Johnson, or Chip Roy, the Republican that was mentioned by Matt Gaetz in his conversation with Massie. If that happens, if anyone joins Thomas Massie in voting against Mike Johnson, it's over. So I want to do a bit more of a deep dive on this. I'm actually going to play this clip from CNN where they discuss Thomas Massie's installation from the consequences of defying Trump, or at least the potential installation that Thomas Massie enjoys from defying Trump.
Chief among them is Thomas Massie, who's the one member who's come out and said explicitly, I'm a no, which Mike Johnson can afford to lose one Republican and still be able to become Speaker. It's the rest that need to worry. But if people are trying to figure out who Thomas Massie is, one, this isn't rare for him. And two, there's this great profile of him in the Wall Street Journal where it says, in part, Massie waves off the political risks. He survived attacks by Trump and his own party before. His wife of 3 decades died last year. Massie says, quote, I don't know how to say this without cussing. If they thought I had no Fs to give before, I definitely have no Fs to give now. Is Massie a symptom of something broader, or is he just Massie?
Well, see, also last month when you heard there, Mike Johnson mentioned palace drama. Well, he experienced that when they were dealing with the impending government shutdown and the spending bills. And that is what it looks like under a Trump administration, which is what he is going to experience, which is by one tweet by Elon Musk, everything sort of tanked that they had worked on. So the next 24 hours, I think, are going to be pretty critical to see how Republicans either get behind Trump's endorsement or not. If Trump changes his mind, I mean, we're living hour by hour here. So whether they're already preparing for it to go into multiple rounds, and what you said about Massie could be just Massie, but it also gives permission to others to vote no if they don't get along with him.
I'm a little.
Yeah. So again, you have 2 competing interests here. You have the Republican Party's penchant for chaos, right? Particularly House Republicans. And the fact that the incentive structure for achieving celebrity, achieving fame, elevating profile is to defy, is to throw a wrench in the works. Think about Matt Gaetz himself, right? His name recognition skyrocketed because he was willing to defy Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader at the time that the Republicans assumed the majority in 2023 after the 2022 midterms. And it took multiple rounds for Kevin McCarthy to become Speaker of the House. Recall, Kevin McCarthy officially secured the Speaker's gavel early Saturday, elected on the 15th ballot with 216 votes after 4 days of unsuccessful House votes and some last-minute drama, courtesy of Matt Gaetz. So it was widely acknowledged as a humiliation of the Republican Party and Kevin McCarthy, and the internal chaos within the GOP, because the GOP is not a serious governing party. They're really good at politicking. They're really good at sensationalism. They're really good at pointing fingers. They have their talent. They have their wit. They have their cunning. Let's be very clear about it. But they don't feel the burden to govern. They feel the burden to throw stones and to point fingers and to either create or identify problems and then obstruct solutions. And that's what we saw for the past 2 years. So, of course, Matt Gaetz is now out of Congress, right? So that's one less chaos agent. But based on what we just heard about Thomas Massie, the fact that he has staved off primaries, the fact that he has defied the quote-unquote establishment before, the fact that he suffered personal tragedies, the death of his wife, which I imagine could be a game changer, right? I mean, as he says, he has, if he had, no F's to give before, he has even fewer now. And that name recognition, that celebrity, that profile will only skyrocket. And it gives him leverage over Mike Johnson and Donald Trump. Imagine if you're Thomas Massie and you have positioned yourself as this principled conservative who is willing to stick it to the establishment, even though there's a cultish devotion to Donald Trump. Imagine how Thomas Massie might feel knowing that he has power over Donald Trump, the cult leader of the Republican Party, who is about to become the most powerful man on earth. I imagine even if Thomas Massie's constituents want him to devote himself to Donald Trump, and I imagine that's a tightrope he's going to have to walk, imagine the rush that would give an elected official who has no F's to give, having that sort of power and leverage over your party and the leader of your party and the president of the United States. I imagine to the extent that, every politician is a narcissist on some level, I imagine that that's going to be a hell of an incentive structure. And he just doesn't seem to be backing down. Newt Gingrich, former Republican Speaker of the House, and really the guy who got this version of the Republican Party started. Mitch McConnell took Newt Gingrich's playbook. Newt was in the House, McConnell was in the Senate, and McConnell basically iterated and improved. But Newt Gingrich, in my opinion, was the true genesis of the contrarian, obstinate, obstructionist Republican Party under President Clinton. This is what Gingrich had to say. I do not understand what the contrarian House Republicans think they will gain by opposing Speaker Mike Johnson. They have no one who can get more votes. They risk crippling Trump's electoral win on January 6th. They are, in effect, allies of Democrats. I challenge them to explain what their endgame is other than noise. Thomas Massie responded. Challenge accepted. First, let me note that the Vote for Mike camp is not trying to make the case that Mike Johnson is endowed with the qualities necessary to lead our conference. Even you have limited yourself here to the procedural justifications for his speakership, rather than telling us why he is a good or capable leader. Even if Mike's entire goal is to do everything Trump wants without debate or question, which I would argue is not healthy for the institution of Congress, he's not going to be good at it. He already demonstrated this month that he won't tell the president what is achievable and what is not achievable in the House, and he lacks the situational awareness himself to know what can pass and what cannot. Number one, what do we hope to gain? A competent speaker who has the will and ability to capitalize on this once-in-a-decade opportunity. Johnson is not up for this task. Also, we want a speaker who inspires the public and can make our case in the media so we can keep the majority for the second half of Trump's term. Johnson nearly led us into the minority in what was a banner year for Trump. He is certain to lose us the majority in 2026. Number two, no one can get more votes. It's somewhat ridiculous to assert that Mike Johnson is the only member of Congress electable to Speaker. He was only electable the first time because he hadn't held any type of leadership position, nor had he ever fought for anything, so no one disliked him and everyone was tired of voting. He won by being the least objectionable candidate, and he no longer possesses that title. Number three, risk crippling Trump's win. This argument is a scare tactic meant to stampede the masses, plain and simple. There is no legal or parliamentary argument for nullifying the national election, even if a speaker is not in place on January 6th. That is, of course, set the stage for a potential constitutional crisis. I digress. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. We'll go to number four. They are allies of the Democrats. Actually, it's Mike Johnson who routinely passes major legislation, Ukraine, omnibus, FISA spending, with only a minority of Republicans and relying most on Democrats. He also owes his current speakership to the Democrats. Here's the roll call for the motion to table the motion to vacate last summer. Pelosi and Jeffries teamed up to save Johnson. In closing, the emperor has no clothes and the entire conference knows it, but few will say it. The public knows it too. Please don't shoot the messengers. So listen, at the time of recording, we have about 30 minutes until the first vote is scheduled to be had. I don't know what's going to happen, but I just think it's interesting that Thomas Massie, despite all of this pressure, is still giving the finger to Mike Johnson and indirectly Donald Trump as well. Interesting stuff. And again, Thomas Massie is the margin of error. If anybody, a single person, Nancy Mace, Chip Roy, Victoria Spars, if any, co-signs what Thomas Massie has to say, that's it for Mike Johnson, at least for one round. So we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.